Oh, what's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. And if you're new here, then welcome to our little corner of the internet. Today, we're going to be watching a video titled "The Smartest Dictator You've Never Heard of," which I already feel like dictators. I mean, they must be smart to get in the position they're in, and also charming and usually narcissistic. So, I hope this is a good one. But let's see what this video is about.
In this sleepy village in the heart of West Africa, a baby was born. That happens all the time, but this particular baby would go on to lead one of the most successful post-colonial African countries and become one of the richest men on earth, all by growing cocoa beans. Félix Houphouët was the son of a chief, a wealthy plantation owner too. As part of the Baoulé people, they just found themselves merged into a French conglomeration called La Côte d'Ivoire, or for us Anglo-commoners, the Ivory Coast. As a bright young boy, he worked his way up through the colonial French school system, going off to study medicine in Dakar before returning to the Ivory Coast to work as a doctor for 15 years. When he became chief of his home region, it was
This is the best. This is not the best, but like a very good example of anything can happen. Imagine you've been working as a doctor for 15 years, suddenly you become a dictator of a whole country. How does that, like, in what, how? You know? It's pretty crazy.
basically an administrative role by this point, while French officers made the big decisions. Houphouët always liked the French. He thought they were good rulers while also adoring their culture. But one of their policies would be his reason to enter politics, their use of forced labor. In 1944, he co-founded and led the African Agricultural Syndicate to protect African farmers against the worst of the French policies, while also advocating for stable prices and less demanding work, that sort of thing. For a country so focused on farming, it quickly became a household name. He then used its success to transform it into the country's first political machine, the Democratic Party of the Ivory Coast. At which point he made his formal entry into politics, being elected as part of the PDCI to France's National Assembly. Felix was off to the capital, and in his first great personal political move, added the
What was that?
word Boigny to the end of his name. It means battering ram in his native language. Félix Houphouët-Boigny. That's how he's known today. His first practical political victory came in 1946 with the passing of the Houphouët-Boigny Law, an act to eliminate forced labor across all French colonies. For this and his syndicate work, he became a bit of a folk hero back home, with songs sung about him and his photo plastered everywhere. By the 50s, he worked his way up to become the first African to serve as a cabinet minister in many French administrations, becoming the main
I'm noticing that the sound of this video is kind of like up and down, so I'm sorry if you can't hear it. Well, I hope that the levels are okay.
ally the government had in Africa. While he would become one of the founding fathers of African independence, Felix always stressed that he preferred the French to stay. The
He looks like a nice man, though.
French, too, preferred easy access to the resources in their African community. But in the bloodiest war of African independence, Algeria gained their freedom at the cost of millions of lives, permanently scarring the French establishment. It was a crisis that would bring the entire republic down and bring Charles de Gaulle, France's World War hero, back to power. One of his first foreign policy moves was to give a referendum to every one of its African colonies asking if it wanted to stay French or not. Felix campaigned across Côte d'Ivoire for the yes side. Oui! Showing off his dictatorial side, he even promised that everyone who voted the wrong way should pack their bags within 24 hours and leave. The people did say oui. In fact, every other colony but Guinea said oui. Even then, by 1960, both sides gave up. Houphouët reluctantly admitted independence was what Ivoirians needed, and de Gaulle went on a West African tour raising the flags of all these new nations. The Ivory Coast got it on August 7th, and Félix was the one and only candidate the Ivoirians could choose from to lead their new country. Félix himself knew running Côte d'Ivoire wasn't going to be a cakewalk. He outright said that the French had left him a state, not a nation. Because there were around 60 ethnic groups, with the fertile south being predominantly Christian and the dry north being mostly Muslim, Houphouët-Boigny justified running the country as a one-party state. Multi-party elections in a country this young, he thought, would devolve into ethnic and religious squabbling, or worse. He wasn't unique among African independence leaders for this.
So he kind of dropped into dictatorship naturally, and also his reasoning does make sense. It does make sense because that happens a lot when there are two regions that don't agree with each other.
Belief. Most preferred one-party states for similar reasons. What was unique is that he tried to deliver results in a trade for this authoritarianism, focusing on economic growth over some sort of economic independence. Félix did two things most in his cohort didn't do: welcomed European businessmen and money, and didn't try to force industrialization on the Ivory Coast. Most African countries saw white flight when they achieved political independence. Here, the French population actually quintupled after independence as Félix sought to attract help and migrants. Most of the 50,000 Frenchmen who lived here were technicians, advisors, banking experts, or some other high-ranking position. He also welcomed immigration from poorer northern countries to work in, and even if they were productive enough, own their own farms. Most of the immigrants who came were from the less stable Sahel, with Burkina Faso sending the most. Today, around a third of the country's population has migrant ancestry or are migrants themselves. The Ivory Coast is the place to be. The main reason they came, because Félix did not pursue a state-led industrialization program. That sounds counterintuitive. Obviously, manufactured goods make more money than raw materials do, and to make them, mechanization is required. But many other African countries botched their industrialization attempts by restricting overseas goods to force domestic industry to take its part. Often, people didn't have the necessary skills or materials to replace them, leading to shortages of everything from medicine in hospitals to tools for farming, making industrialization harder, not easier. What the Ivory Coast has is some amazing land for growing specialty crops like coffee and palm oil, but most importantly, cocoa.
This is such a random video as well because I've never heard of like the history of specific countries in the African region. So I find it quite fascinating how much is going on in the world. Damn.
The Ivorian government used many incentives to get as many people growing cocoa and other crops as it could. One was a preferential trade deal with France to get a minimum price and quota guarantee. Others were cash or tax bonuses for starting farms in designated areas the government wanted to settle. It also helped that Ghana pushed large mechanized farms rather than focusing on small farmers' needs, so their main rival's cocoa output declined during this period. Many Ghanaian farmers close to Côte d'Ivoire would actually smuggle their cocoa over the border to sell it at higher government-guaranteed prices. So during its boom decades, cocoa production tripled while coffee production doubled. Because of the growing post-war demand for chocolate, as well as its openness, the Ivory Coast was a standout example of an African economic miracle, led by agriculture. From the 60s to the 80s, its GDP grew at an average of 7.3%.
Oh, but this was way back, like in the from the 60s to the 80s? Well, not actually, it wasn't that long ago.
A year, compared to Senegal's 2.5% and Ghana's 0.1%. The country became the world's largest producer and exporter of cocoa beans, providing almost half of the world's supply even today. And who was the biggest producer within the country? That's right, Félix Houphouët-Boigny himself. He never made it a secret either. In one speech, he bragged about becoming the largest pineapple and avocado producer in the country, justifying his use of Swiss bank accounts because he was rich off of farming, not looting the state budget. In the same speech, he then bragged about being responsible for a quarter of all bank deposits in Abidjan, the country's economic capital.
Damn.
Now's a good time to mention how he ran his political system. Patronage jobs for everyone. Almost anyone, including his political rivals, could get access to the cocoa money by getting a government job. The cocoa surplus was also used to develop other industries and poorer parts of the country, like the north. He gave more of it to his friends and supporters, of course, but still, patronage for everyone? That's pretty liberal for an African country. Though, a French investigation found that at least 10% of the country's cocoa revenue found its way into his personal bank accounts. Bank accounts worth an estimated $11 billion. So even though Felix was the main beneficiary, many
$11 billion?
people supported his rule, as they could still see a material improvement in their lives. Paved roads were laid across the country, new dams were built to provide electricity, schools and hospitals were noticeably better than under French administration, the new San Pedro port was busy with shipments, and new skyscrapers and hotels sprung up across Abidjan. Economically, these were good times.
Abidjan, I wonder what that looks like. Is it that like the southest? Maybe it's not, but wait, was this in the south? My concentration. It was in the south, wasn't it? Nah, it was more in like, or maybe, I don't know. But I wonder what it looks like, the city.
Felix was a quiet, short, and soft-spoken man who preferred to stay out of the spotlight whenever possible. You wouldn't expect a guy like him to run such a strong government. During his political career, he won 7 5-year terms in a row, only one of which was actually open to other parties. The PDCI was a political machine found everywhere throughout the country. Every shop, farm, street, there'd be some sort of poster or representative channeling info up to Papa Houphouët. This didn't mean he was hated throughout the country. In fact, like before independence, people continued to dance and sing songs for him whenever he traveled around the country. As long as living standards were rising, people and Ivorian elites were a little more lenient towards his authoritarian tendencies and blatant corruption.
I would love to travel in Africa, but I just feel like if I went to, like, not just travel in Africa, like go like in the rainforest and everything, but I feel like if I went there, I would probably, with my luck, step on a snake and then fall because of the pain into a red ant home and get just, you know me, but it would be really, really nice though.
His early rule, he had rounded up many coup conspirators within his own party, including 6 of his own cabinet ministers and 5 party founders. While around 20 were sentenced to death, only 1 actually went through. Instead, he preferred hard labor as a punishment, thinking this would make him look a little more compassionate. But as the miracle went on, he became less paranoid and more comfortable to leave the country, spending more time in Paris or Switzerland than the Ivory Coast itself. This would often translate into, like his pre-colonial days, being France's best connection in West Africa, getting him called things like a neo-colonialist or a French African puppet by his rivals in the country and region when he maintained close economic and military ties with the French. And of course,
I don't know what my neighbors are doing. A lot of sounds going on throughout this video. We're good though, we're good.
of course, for his money. He himself identified as a bourgeois landowner after all. One of his more egregious projects to show off his wealth he thought of while at dinner with Tunisia's ex-dictator. He wanted his hometown to be something more than just a cocoa farming village. So he ordered that Yamoussoukro would be built into a grand new capital. It was fit with 6-lane highways, new skyscrapers, hotels, an artificial lake filled with crocodiles, and sitting in the center, he built what would become one of the largest churches on earth. Just a bit bigger than Hagia Sophia with an...
Wow, that is so pretty. Look at how tiny the humans are. It's so hard to imagine proportion, at least for me, from seeing it in a photo. Like, I should see this in real life. But if humans are this small, this must be absolutely massive.
Exterior larger than any other. The Basilica of Our Lady of Peace was built to hold 300,000 visitors in it and its outside. And to be fair, it looks spectacular. Look at these columns, the dome, full roof access. The church even has glass artwork of Felix himself kneeling beside Jesus Christ. However, as time went on, it did become a bit of a symbol of Houphouët's corruption and authoritarianism. It's estimated to have cost around $500 million to build, while Yamoussoukro's developments cost $2 billion. Outside of Abidjan, the new capital sucked up 1/3 of the country's regional investment budget. The city was also built more as an escape for the elites of society rather than as a larger, livable city. Even today, Abidjan has over 30 times as many people as Yamoussoukro. It probably could have been a little more accepted by the people had it not been for a complete reversal of Ivorian development which happened as the basilica was being finished. 3 events in particular caused major upheaval within the country. The first was probably the most inevitable, the cocoa crash. The 1980s saw a massive push by other countries like Brazil, Ecuador, and Indonesia to cash in on high cocoa prices. While Côte d'Ivoire never lost its dominant position, chocolate manufacturers began to buy cocoa at lower prices, eventually demanding even the Ivorians sell them at a discount. The thing was, the government had been guaranteeing minimum prices for decades, so in what they thought was a temporary setback, they continued to pay cocoa farmers what they were promised, taking out debt if they had to. Prices wouldn't reach their 1977 peak again until 2024. Then, in 1988, Félix announced that the Ivory Coast would be boycotting world markets unless chocolate makers would pay the Ivorians what they wanted again. That only lasted 18 months. Not a single other government joined him in the boycott, and when Ivorian officials went to draw from their cocoa stabilization fund, made for times like these, they found it had already been drained. From its peak, cocoa prices quartered and stayed low, leaving the Ivorian government unable to pay its debt, bankrupt, and Houphouët no choice but to cut government services. Farmer incomes on average halved, they accepted an IMF structural adjustment program, and at the worst of the crisis, civil servants could not be paid. In a push to make up some income, Houphouët's and successive governments tried to push more and more cocoa production. But this only ended up marginally improving yields. In fact, because of this push and illegal farming, the country which has been the most deforested since 1990 is the Ivory Coast. The unrest is likely what led to the second event. 1990, an election year.
Oh no, it just starts spiraling down.
Where the PDCI was just supposed to give you a list of their candidates, saw mass protests against Felix's autocracy and flaunting of wealth. with them eventually calling for elections to be opened. These were led by a history team.
I wonder if does Europe probably purchases the cocoa beans from Africa, and I wonder if America does as well, or maybe from North. I mean from South America, no? Or I don't know. But yeah, my question was, you know how chocolate it tastes different in America than in Europe? I've never tried American chocolate, but I've just heard that it's not very similar to the European version. And I wonder why that is. Like, what do you guys put in your chocolate? What do we put in our chocolate? Anyways.
Teacher named Laurent Gbagbo. And while Houphouët initially dismissed the protesters as drug addicts, he eventually folded, allowing dozens of new parties to run. Still, in his first fair election, he won 82% of the vote. While democracy is great, we love it, Felix's worries about multi-party elections would be somewhat justified when they became the trigger for not one, but 2 civil wars in the 21st century.
Wow.
And lastly was Felix himself. After 33 years in office, as the last independence leader of his generation, the longest serving African leader to that point, Papa Houphouët died of cancer in 1993. As a pragmatic man focused on economic growth over political freedom, I'd say he was pretty successful in his goal. And hey, he lived a pretty good life too. There were 2 potential successors the army could have backed. One was his prime minister, Alassane Ouattara. The other, who got the job, his president of the National Assembly, Henri Konan Bédier. Both were IMF economists with PhDs, so at least you could expect both would stabilize the country. Wrong! In the context of a failed economy, vastly lower living standards, and an unhappy population, Bédier instead blamed every single problem in the country on immigrants. He started and institutionalized what was known as Ivoirité, a platform to separate native Ivorians from those of immigrant backgrounds and then disenfranchise them.
What?
This was eventually extended.
That makes absolutely no sense. There was a lot of immigration, they just said, because everybody wanted to come and farm. Why would you do that? That makes no sense. Like, nothing good can come out of that at this point.
From those with immigrant backgrounds to Muslim backgrounds to northern Muslims who had been living in Ivory Coast for centuries. Many were excluded from voting or outright had their citizenship removed. Ouattara himself was a Muslim from a Burkinabe background, being banned from running in the 1995 and 2000 elections because of his immigrant father. So now, not only was the economy failing, but the government was openly hostile to at least 40% of the population, mostly concentrated in one geographic region. Obviously, that bred resentment. And in 1999, it boiled over with a coup d'etat led by Robert Gué. Under international pressure, Gué didn't hold on to power, letting the 2000 election happen with Ivoirité rules still in place. Laurent Gbagbo, the one who led the protests against Houphouët, defeated him. Still, he didn't get rid of Ivoirité, and the army revolted in 2002, splitting the country in half and starting what would become a 5-year-long civil war. Unlike most African civil wars, the map to understand...
This is exactly what the first dictator was trying to avoid.
This one is pretty simple. North versus South. Just 2 fronts. The rebels called the New Forces and the government's security forces. And of course, France was there, like everywhere else in West Africa. Both sides tried to extract as much money out of cocoa as possible, fueling maybe the only civil war run off of chocolate. The Bagbo government in the south set up 8 new taxes and registrations on cocoa, increasing the government's profit by 9 times, while the drier north set up roadblocks and blocked cocoa from crossing to the south. The war was funded more by cocoa production than by blood diamonds. After thousands of deaths and destroying any sort of imminent hope for the country, they came to an iffy peace in 2007. But 3 years later, the 2010 election then reignited the war for 5 months, with both
Wow.
Bagbo and, now able to run again, Ouattara claiming victory. Despite being the leading voice behind the country's democratic transformation, Bagbo would go on to lead an incredibly corrupt and deadly administration throughout the war period. Suspected Ouattara supporters were stopped at roadblocks and shot. Those wearing Ouattara t-shirts were caught and tortured, and he openly stole from the Cocoa Fund. He was only caught in a French-backed raid and then put in prison. Ouattara has been Côte d'Ivoire's president since, running the Rally of Houphouëtists for Democracy and Peace. And after the war, he and the Houphouëtists have won some Boigny-level margins. It's a little reminiscent of the big dog himself. Under Ouattara's relative stability, the Ivory Coast has been able to grow again. If we look at per capita income since the end of the wars, it's been steadily growing, although not yet reaching the peaks it saw in the 70s. In part, it's because of the political stability, but another part is that Ouattara ruled Ivory Coast during the highest cocoa prices ever. Not just highest, but insanely unthinkable highs. If you've noticed all these new chocolate products in recent years that have suspiciously less chocolate in them, like caramel Reese's Cups or Dubai chocolate, this is why. Chocolate has become much more expensive in recent years, and Ivory Coast's
What do you put if not chocolate though?
still by far the largest producer of cocoa
What have I been eating?
has benefited. Slightly, most of the crop was diseased, so it didn't sell much. Unlike the old days though, the Ivory Coast is much less dependent on cocoa today, while they've also started to manufacture some more valuable cocoa-based products, like cocoa butter, cocoa paste, and even the crown jewel, chocolate itself. Selling beans only accounts for around 5% of the value chain in making chocolate. So, for a country which produces nearly half of the world's cocoa, it's, excuse my pun, low-hanging fruit. Whether Ouattara is another Felix is to be determined. Probably not. He's already 84 years old on his 4th presidential term in a country where only 2 terms are legally allowed. There are some similarities. Both Houphouët-Boigny and Ouattara are from royal families. Both lived over good prices, good growth, and stable times. Both seem impossible to vote out. But when it comes to building the country and even the continent in their image, there truly is no one else like Félix Houphouët-Boigny. Boigny! If you enjoyed this video, please do subscribe. And check out the video I made on Seychelles' own Dictator. Imagine Houphouët, but a lot more chill on a tropical island.
What? Who is this man? Who is this man? Okay, that was very interesting though. We've never gone through other history on this channel yet. I don't think so. I found that quite intriguing, and it's also so weird to hear about, you know, civil wars going on that I've never even heard of when you know, it seems like something that would be on the news, but I feel like things like that happen way more than what one knows of, you know? But either way, guys, thank you so much for joining me for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys in the next video.